Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. It's time to get week 84 of the TTT underway with another Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, folks, last week we went spelunking through the glittering caves of Aglarond, but it's time to leave those beautiful sights behind and head north to the Fords of Isen. After leaving the Deeping Combe and finding their way through a forest that wasn't there yesterday, we read about how Theoden and company, on their way to parley with Saruman, journeyed through the land. They rode now at an easy pace, and dark came down upon the plains about them. The slow moon mounted, now waxing towards the full, and in its cold silver light the swelling grasslands rose and fell like a wide gray sea. They had ridden for some 4 hours from the branching of the roads when they drew near to the fords. Long slopes ran swiftly down to where the river spread in stony shoals between high grassy terraces. Borne upon the wind, they heard the howling of wolves. Their hearts were heavy, remembering the many men that had fallen in battle in this place. The road dipped between rising turf banks, carving its way through the terraces to the river's edge and up again upon the further side. There were 3 lines of flat stepping stones across the stream, and between them fords for horses that went from either brink to a bare eyot in the midst. The riders looked down upon the crossings, and it seemed strange to them, for the fords had ever been a place full of the rush and chatter of water upon stones. But now they were silent. The beds of the stream were almost dry, a bare waste of shingles and gray sand. As Eomer observes, this isn't usual. He asks, "What sickness has befallen the river? Many fair things Saruman has destroyed. Has he devoured the springs of Isen too?" Let's get one more look at the fords, this time from Unfinished Tales and the Battles of the Fords of Isen. The Isen came down swiftly from its sources above Isengard, but in the flat land of the Gap it became slow until it turned west. Then it flowed on through country, falling by long slopes down into the low-lying coastlands of furthest Gondor and the Enedwaith, and it became deep and rapid. Just above this westward bend were the Fords of Isen. There the river was broad and shallow, passing in 2 arms about a large eyot over a stony shelf covered with stones and pebbles brought down from the north. Only here, south of Isengard, was it possible for large forces, especially those heavily armed or mounted, to cross the river. Now take a look at a map of the region, and you'll see that the Isen, or Sir Angren in Sindarin, has its source above Isengard in the southern peaks of the Misty Mountains. Follow that river south towards the White Mountains, and you'll see where it curves dramatically towards the west. The fords are located just a few miles to the north of that bend. Now, as you can see from the map, the Gap of Rohan itself is strategically important. Then add what we read in Unfinished Tales about the fords being the only place south of Isengard itself where a large army, especially on horseback, could cross, and you can see why it's critical for Rohan to control this location. But step back in time to when Rohan was Calenarthon and under Gondorian control. They were able to guard the fords from 2 nearby fortresses, what we now think of as the Hornburg, which was then the fortress of Aglarond, and Orthanc, the fortress of Isengard. Going back through the history of this place in Unfinished Tales, we read, in the Disaster of the Gladden Fields, that after the fall of Sauron at the Battle of the Last Alliance, Isildur sent the greater part of the army of Arnor to Eriador by the Númenorian road from the Fords of Isen to Fornost. Much later, in 2510, when Cirion granted Calenarthon to Eorl the Young, we read that it was agreed also that the great road, which had formerly run through Anorion and Calenarthon to Athrad Angren, the Fords of Isen, and thence northwards on its way to Arnor, should be open to all travelers of either people, without hindrance in time of peace, and its maintenance should, from the Mering stream to the Fords of Isen, be in the care of the Eotheod. Now there is an interesting linguistic footnote to that passage. Christopher Tolkien points us to a passage in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn where the Sindarin name is given as Ethride Engren. Now that latter name is the plural, where Athrad Angren is the singular. It's a ford, Athrad Angren, or its multiple fords, Ethride Engren. Now, later in 2758, when great troubles came to Rohan, Wulf, the son of Freka, who was killed by King Helm with one mighty punch, led a force of Dunlendings. From Appendix A2, the House of Aora, we read, "At the same time, Rohan was again invaded from the east, and the Dunlendings, seeing their chance, came over the Isen and down from Isengard. It was soon known that Wulf was their leader. They were in great force, for they were joined by enemies of Gondor that landed in the mouths of Lefnui and Isen. The Rohirrim were defeated, and their land was overrun, and those who were not slain or enslaved fled to the dales of the mountains. Helm was driven back with great loss from the crossings of Isen, and took refuge in the Hornburg and the ravine behind, which was after known as Helm's Deep." Next, a few days before Frodo leaves Bag End, the Tale of Years tells us that the Black Riders crossed the Fords of Isen. In fact, that's the same day that Gandalf escaped from Saruman. So, less than a week later, he leaves Rohan on Shadowfax and crosses the Isen here on September 24th, 3018. Now, the battles of the Fords of Isen took place here on February 25th and March 2nd of 3019, but those would require far more than just an episode or two. In fact, Matt from the Nerd of the Rings and I covered those battles in episodes 360 to 362 back in February and March of this year, so take a listen there if you'd like to know more. For now, though, folks, that wraps it up for Middle-earth Map Monday. And yes, one of these days I will go back to Mailbag Mondays, so if you have any questions, email them to barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Just be sure to let Barlaman know your question is for today's Tolkien Times. To those of you who support the show on Patreon, thank you. It's your support that gives me the ability to invest time and resources into researching, writing, and producing these episodes. Now, if you're not yet supporting the show, please consider it. Visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times. You can join the TTT Content Council to help decide what I'm going to talk about on future episodes. You get a bonus episode every week, a hangout with me every month, and a whole lot more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we continue Turin Bar Tuesdays. Podcast listeners, subscribe to the show in your podcast apps. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and get all of the PPP productions here. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.